One of the most magical and hauntingly beautiful archaeological sites in the world sits hidden deep in the rainforest, nestled in the foothills of Chiapas in southern Mexico. This is one of the most picturesquely sited ruins in the world. Palenque still holds mysteries hidden beneath the tangled growth of the rainforest. It was here, at Palenque, that one of the richest tombs in the New World was discovered, one that has been compared to the find of Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt. Rather than gold, though, there were jade masks and extraordinary stone and stucco sculptures that told a story and answered many questions about the history and esoteric beliefs of the ancient Maya. For instance, why did they create jade masks for a corpse? Jade was considered one of the most precious substances to the ancient Maya because it was the color of life, vegetation, and water, and it implied resurrection. Jade here in the New World is actually the stone that's more properly called jadeite. The site of Palenque, the name given to it by the Spanish conquerors, is the source of works that reach the pinnacle of Maya art and aesthetics. They are the equal of any art in the Old World. The stone carving found here is extremely expressive and skillful, but many Westerners find it strange and otherworldly. In fact, in the 1970s, it was seen as so alien that the Petén rainforest and the Maya site of Tikal were used as the alien rebel base in the movie Star Wars. You really need some help in understanding this art or reading it, because much of it combines art and glyphic text, much as the Egyptians' works did. However, in contrast to the Egyptians, the Maya were much freer and less rigid in their line and their shapes, in their canons, and in their expression in art and writing. The single most illuminating artwork from Palenque is this extraordinary, massive carved stone sarcophagus found in the tomb of its greatest king. When you read it and interpret it, it tells a story of this Maya king's death and his divine resurrection. It presents his royal ancestry and his place in the Maya cosmos. The relief and its temple send us a message of immortality and timelessness. Palenque's art and inscriptions, like this sarcophagus cover, played a key role in helping us understand much more about the ancient Maya culture in general. Until these were deciphered in the last few decades, much of Maya history and thought was shrouded in a great deal of mystery. I first visited Palenque in 1975 on a Harvard archaeology student expedition. I was an undergraduate, and like many before and after me, I was enchanted by the place. Heavy rainfall, lush forests, spider and howler monkeys, and colorful tropical birds like macaws and toucans all created the diverse and exotic sounds of the tropics. I stopped to pet a smelly peccary, a wild pig that's found in the forest. The limestone temples and palace of Palenque gleamed and beckoned to me. I climbed the stone steps up the 9 levels of the Temple of the Inscriptions and gazed at features it was named for, the 3 tablets with lengthy inscriptions found inside the rooms at the top. This is something that you're not any longer allowed to do, unfortunately. Was this really the sacred city of one of the most famous of Maya rulers, Pakal the Great? In fact, it was, and the story of the ancient city of La Camja, or Big Water, as it was called, of King Pakal himself, and of the Maya, really came to light with the discoveries made here in the second half of the 20th century. The second longest hieroglyphic inscription known in the Maya world is found at the top of the Temple of the Inscriptions, and it reveals the history, both real and mythical, of this Maya kingdom. But when I visited as a teenager, the glyphs had not yet been completely deciphered, and we knew much less about the Maya. Here's an aerial view of Palenque. The core of the city, you see, represents only a tiny fraction of all the structures and habitations that once existed, maybe 2% to 10% according to some scholars, but it is the most important and impressive part. Most of Palenque had been swallowed up by the dense rainforest until the 19th century, and much of it still lies beneath thick jungle vegetation. This central part is the royal and sacred core of the city. Palenque is known from inscriptions to have been a settlement of importance as early as 400 AD, and it was mostly in the last flowering of what we call the Maya late classic period, in about 650 to 790 AD, that Palenque reached its high point. Palenque's art and power flourished under the great king Kinish Khanab Pakal and his sons and successors. Pakal, as we call him, is the best-known Maya ruler, and during his exceptionally long reign of 68 years, from 615 to 683, he created much of Palenque's landscape that you see today, building the temples and the palace, and in the process he forged a unique art style that was among the most beautiful, animated, and complex seen in the New World. Alberto Ruz, a Mexican archaeologist, started excavating at Palenque in 1949. He was at the top of the Temple of the Inscriptions when he noticed a stone floor panel that had plugged holes in it in the interior of one of the rooms. The workmen found that it could be removed and lifted out, and inside they discovered a hidden stairwell filled with stone rubble. It wasn't until 1952, after digging through and removing all that rubble from the stairwell for 4 seasons, that archaeologists broke through to the sealed chamber deep inside the Temple of the Inscriptions. Ruz saw what no one had gazed upon for over 1,000 years, a crypt with shimmering stalactites and carved stucco figures on the wall, glazed in stone drippings. Most impressive of all was an intricately carved, massive stone sarcophagus lid. The temple was built as Pakal's funerary monument. It is this enormous and complex relief carving on the sarcophagus that we'll explore and explain in this lecture. The relief is probably the single most famous Maya artwork, and deservedly so. It not only awes us with its artistry, but reading it can actually explain many obscure ideas and practices of the ancient Maya, from their mythic beliefs to their concepts of kingship, the afterlife, and the cosmos. We'll look at it in context in order to understand the work and the late classic Maya culture, which was extraordinary at the time this was created, just before 700 AD. The ancient Maya are unique for several reasons. They developed the most complex and artistic glyphic writing system and art in the ancient Americas, and they flowered as a civilization or complex society for almost 1,000 years, deep in a rainforest habitat that actually presented unusual difficulties for sustenance and human habitation. The Maya so-called classic phase went from about 250 to 900 AD. During this time, huge stone monuments and structures were created by the Maya, pyramidal structures, many of which were the temples or funerary monuments of kings. The rich symbolism of the stone carving and the fluidity of line, which is characteristic of the Maya, make these monuments stunningly beautiful. It's even more astounding an accomplishment when one realizes that all this artwork and architecture was created without metal tools or any beasts of burden. Maya buildings were based on a rubble core with stone facings, and the interior spaces were created by using a corbelled arch. Corbelled arches are created when you add stones to the top of an opening in a wall that are progressively offset closer to one another until they span the gap in the middle. Characteristics of classic Maya culture include the building of these monumental stone structures in ceremonial centers, the use of stone stela and altars to record significant events, the use of the sacred long count or exact and sophisticated dating records in hieroglyphs, counted from a mythical beginning date of 3114 BC. They also include hieroglyphic inscriptions recording the history and or the mythology of the Maya, and a central role for a divine king, an ajah in Maya, in each polity or city. Palenque had its own distinctive twist on Maya customs and art, as we will see. What we are all still learning about the Maya is that their belief system was much more complex than we had even imagined. Their ways of expressing ideas in art and writing were sophisticated, like their invention of the concept of zero or the null symbol. Sometimes things are difficult to interpret. They had numerous gods. Some are still mysterious to us. The almost full decipherment of Maya hieroglyphs, in fact, has been accomplished only in the last 20 or 30 years. Only now is it possible to speak of a political history of the Maya. So we now actually have dynasties of kings with actual names for many of the city-states in the Maya area. And these city-states were often in conflict with one another. Boundaries and allegiances changed a lot. But for us, the ancient culture covers an area comprised by modern states, southern Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and western El Salvador. All of these contain Maya relics. Palenque has an unusually lush setting for a Maya site, and I learned the hard way. We had to throw away my entire family's shoes after the torrential rainfall ruined them during our last visit. They actually average about 120 inches of rain a year there at Palenque. Palenque's location was both strategic and sacred. The site lies on the northern edge of the hills of Chiapas and looks out over the vast plain of Tabasco to the north. Thus it was easily defended. Cascades and springs abound in this gorgeous landscape, most importantly the Otalum River. The Otalum had been canalized by the Maya, and it still runs through the most central part of Palenque. In fact, in the palace, it seems to have been pressurized to be used for actual toilets. The name of the ancient city was Lacamja, or Big Water, as I mentioned before, and the name Lacamja may reflect the presence of this sacred river. The kingdom itself was called Pakal, or Bone Kingdom, perhaps because it lay on the western edge of the Maya sphere of influence, and thus, metaphorically, it reflected the setting sun. Let's turn our attention now to the Temple of the Inscriptions. The temple is a rectangular stepped pyramid set almost at a right angle to the larger, lower, and massive palace. It's set into a hillside with 8 stepped levels and a 9th, which forms the plinth for the temple at the top. And the Maya conceived of their underworld as having 9 levels. It's oriented 15 degrees east of magnetic north. The temple on top is long and low, and its interior is divided into 2 parallel ranges of rooms supported by corbelled arches with 5 doorways opening out upon the front. It has a mansard or hipped roof, which lightens the load of the walls. This is an unusual shape elsewhere for the Maya, but it's characteristic of Palenque. The temple is made to look even taller and lighter by a roof comb or crest, which was made from stone and stucco. Palenque has its own special style of roof comb, which here is perforated. They cut the stone to make the designs and also to lighten the load, the weight. Painted sculptures once adorned the temple walls and that roof crest. The temple's rear rooms contain these 3 tablets with lengthy inscriptions on the walls, giving the temple its name. The tablets tell the story of the Maya rulers of Palenque from mythic time up to the exploits and the death of Pakal in 683 AD. They go as far as to include his son who ruled after him, Khan Balam. It seems the temple was mostly erected during Pakal's reign, and then it was finished by this son and finally dedicated, most probably in 690 AD. In the inscription, the entire dynastic sequence of Palenque is interwoven with the celebration of rituals honoring Palenque's own special divinities. These deities were known as the Palenque Triad, and they're still a little mysterious to us today. Pakal ascended to the throne when he was only 12 years old, and his mother, Lady Jacques Cook, ruled as regent before him. That was an unusual arrangement in Maya society. Here, Lady Jacques Cook is shown handing over the drum major crown of kingship to her son. Thus, in this inscription and elsewhere in the art, Pakal, whose royal pedigree was a bit shaky, sought to justify his rule. He needed to show who he was and secure the succession of his line by immortalizing his remains in this funerary pyramid for all to see. Ancestors were known to live in mountains, and Pakal's funerary temple was called his House of Resurrection. The monument of the temple also proved to be a great way to boast about his accomplishments, and there were in fact many. These accomplishments included restoring order to the Palenque Triad gods, performing rites that had been neglected during the bad times before he became king, and making Palenque a more powerful polity in the Maya world. And he built all these temples and palace buildings, or rebuilt them. These sort of things, in fact, are something that you see rulers all around the world boasting about. Egyptian tombs and funerary temples are full of lists of accomplishments of the rulers and boasts by them. The most exciting discovery made at Palenque so far is that hidden stairway at the top of the Temple of the Inscriptions. The stairway and the pyramid's interior are an ingenious approach to a funerary monument. The steep stairway turns a sharp 90 degrees and leads down into an anteroom before the closed-off crypt. In front of the door of the tomb, the skeletal bones of 5 sacrificed young people were interred in a masonry box. They were meant to accompany the ruler on his sacred journey to the underworld. They were attendants. The Maya used human sacrifice in many different instances, and this is one of them. The tomb chamber itself was corbel vaulted and decorated in relief. Stucco figures of Pakal's illustrious royal ancestors were sculpted onto the wall, and they proclaimed his pedigree. But the most curious and unique feature of the tomb chamber was something called a psychoduct. It was a tube that went from the topmost level of the temple to the sarcophagus itself, where it ended in a snake body. This psychoduct was meant to allow the deceased spirit to rise to heaven, and snakes were known to shed their skins and renew themselves, so that was a very apt metaphor for resurrection. Now let's look at what is actually shown on the sarcophagus cover. We see a man in the center in a curious, somewhat awkward, bent position with his knees drawn up and his head looking upward. This is Pakal himself. He's portrayed in the fetal position, or that of an infant, in a pose that actually constitutes the Maya glyph for baby, unen. But he's no ordinary baby. He's the divine baby Kawil, as seen by the burning torch of Kawil a Maya deity associated with kingship. This burning torch emanates from his forehead. The artists elegantly posed his feet as if to balance him on his posterior, which rests in a bowl. This is a solar bowl. It has the sun sign on it, which in turn is placed within a skeletal maw, or place of emergence. So we are to read that image of the king as emerging like the sun from the earth. In other words, Pakal is part of the solar cycle. He's being reborn or resurrected, and so he's shown as an infant emerging from this bowl and from the skull beneath it, which reads as a metaphor for a seed. To the Maya, bones, particularly skulls, were seen as being like seeds for future life. So we have underworld associations at the bottom of the lid. In fact, the skull and crossbones, which we associate with Western pirates, probably had its origins here in the art of the Maya. In the center region of the sarcophagus lid, above Pakal, we see a cross-like object, which is a simplified, abstract tree. In the past, this was thought to be the Maya world tree, which figures importantly in Maya creation mythology and ideas about the cosmos. The tree seems to have been based on the ubiquitous and huge ceiba tree that grows in the Petén rainforest. However, a closer reading of this particular tree, provided by the Maya epigrapher David Stewart, reveals that it has a name, Shiny Jewel Tree. The cross branches are draped with jade beads. And remember, jade was the most precious material in the Maya world, and it signified life. And it has animated blossoms or serpent heads at its end. Signs for preciousness are strewn about the background. In the text, this shiny jewel tree was said to have sprouted at a special date, a Katun ending, or 20 years, celebrated when Pakal's reign reached a turning point. This was when the Maya dating system turned over like an odometer to 9, 11, 0, 0, 0. One message conveyed by this part of the lid here is that Pakal provided wealth and sustenance, and the riches of nature and the court flowed from the king to the populace. This central area of the lid constitutes the earthly realm. On the top of the tree is perched this fabulous, fantastic bird. His tail feathers look a bit like a quetzal, whose precious long green feathers were prized and they were worn by Maya elites. But the rest of him looks very unlike an ordinary bird. This is a supernatural or celestial bird that played an important role in Maya mythology. Different birds were shown perched on top of the 4 directional trees, mapping out the cosmos. The birds symbolize the celestial realm. This celestial symbolism is accentuated by what we call a sky band that runs around the perimeter of the top of the lid and indicates the mythic status of the image. Several other metaphors are referenced in the sarcophagus lid, and they make the interpretation even more complex and interesting. The Maya king here, Pakal, is likened to the maize god. Maize and the maize god are key to Maya myth and religion because maize was not only one of the most important foodstuffs, but was also a metaphor for all sustenance. In fact, the corn cob is often likened to a human head. In art, we can see this metaphor made real. Thus, on another level, Pakal is part of the agricultural cycle, where maize grows from seed corn, blossoms, and is cut down only to renew itself again. The metaphor extends to a cycle of sacrifice as well, because every living thing is part of a cycle of death and renewal. So dying led inevitably to rebirth and resurrection. In fact, child sacrifices were made in bowls, like the one shown, and Pakal is likened to a child from his posture. Now, if we go to the side of the stone sarcophagus, the theme of rebirth is further supported. We see there a series of Pakal's ancestors. The ancestors are all personified fruit trees, different kinds. The sides of the sarcophagus are firmly rooted in the earthly realm. Pakal's father and mother are shown on the narrow end. Other important ancestors are portrayed, and above these tree-person portraits are inscriptions describing the scene. The walls of the tomb depict 9 large stucco figures, who are also the ancestors of Pakal. Each one clutches a serpent staff bearing the head of the deity of royalty, Kawil. These ancestor reliefs emphasize Pakal's dynastic lineage and the nobility of his line. It's another bit of propaganda, so to speak, that shows how Pakal fits into a mythic and real sequence of rulers and revered forebears who ruled the state. This tomb really demonstrates his importance as a king, and it ensures his rebirth and immortality. It's the sort of thing we also see in Egyptian tombs and funerary temples, where dynastic lineage was important, as was the idea of procuring immortality. Pakal's son, Kinish Khan Balam II, or Snake Jaguar, was his successor, and the one who finished this funerary pyramid after Pakal's death in 683. Pakal was an astounding 80 years old when he died, and one of the greatest and longest-lived kings in the Maya world, and most likely the whole world if we look at that and farther afield. Khan Balam therefore had a lot to prove, and he wanted to evoke his father's greatness to his own advantage. And that's something that all of Pakal's successors did. So Khan Balam built a complex of 3 smaller pyramids on the other side of Palenque center in about 692 AD. And this is called by us the cross group. These temples were arranged with a striking aesthetic sense, with elegance amid nature. These 3 temples were unique in their symbolism. They were meant to honor the Palenque gods, the Palenque triad, but they of course honored their builder, Khan Balam, and placed him in a dynastic sequence in the process. Let's take a quick look at them and see how they compare to Pakal's Great Pyramid of the Inscriptions and his sarcophagus cover. The temples have an unusual design for Maya buildings. Each bears a rear room, which is a sanctuary, that has a relief tablet bearing an inscription and a double portrait of Khan Balam himself. They depict Khan Balam as a young boy at age 6, and then his older self as king. Between his young and older images is symbolism related to each of the gods to which the 3 temples are dedicated. For instance, here is the Temple of the Cross, the highest one and probably the most important. And here's the relief inside it. You'll notice that the cross in the center, for which the temple was named, is a lot like the one you just saw on Pakal's sarcophagus. In fact, you have a variation on Pakal's lid's composition right here with his son's version. This one shows a sacred world tree or shiny jeweled tree once again. And at the top, you have one of the fantastic celestial birds. The tree arises from a sacred offering bowl with the sun symbol on it, and the skull beneath is probably, again, a metaphor for a seed. On either side of the skull, you have a sky band of celestial symbols. All of this together indicates, in a way that is complex and coded, that this god is concerned with the celestial realm, the sky, and solar rebirth. The very long inscription seems to confirm this interpretation, and it also recounts a dynastic history of Palenque up to the illustrated king, Canbalan, himself. He associates himself with offerings to this deity and to the solar rebirth, the eastern sun, which will provide his resurrection as well. He's repeated the unusual artistic devices and the symbolism of his own father. All of this is intended to show Canbalam's greatness, his position in a long line of rulers, and his piety and central role in honoring the sacred deities of Palenque. With all this to his credit, he seems to be assuring his own resurrection, just as his father had. If we go back to the tomb of Pakal and Canbalam's father, we can see a few more artworks that were deposited within it to accompany Pakal on his journey of rebirth. We don't know exactly why it was placed there, but a striking stucco portrait of Pakal was found under his sarcophagus. He has a very characteristic nose with a lengthened bridge, and he's easily recognizable as Pakal. He looks the same way in his reliefs. He seems to wear his hair like the young maize god. It's a sensitive, naturalistic rendering with slightly parted lips and heavy lids. The sculptural qualities of his head here strike a contrast with the flatness of Pakal's figure on his sarcophagus relief. You are really, in a sense, comparing a solid 3D sculptural portrait with a relief that is a complex, flat diagram. It's a glyphic representation of a religious narrative. So much more information is included and communicated when you work in 2 dimensions like this, and that was important to the Maya, who had a lot of complex religious and cosmic ideas that they wanted to impart. Now, also found in Pakal's tomb was this magnificent jade funerary mask, shown here as it was reconstructed. It was placed over Pakal's face, and the use of jade is an intentional metaphor for life, rebirth, and preciousness. You can see that even in this intricate mosaic form, Pakal's facial features were evoked. He was an extraordinary and distinctive king and instantly recognizable. Pakal, in fact, wanted to achieve immortality and resurrection by building his temple during his lifetime. He built something unique and beautiful, and within it, he placed some of the most complicated and masterful art produced in the Maya world. The design of the tomb and his sarcophagus lid promised him divinity and immortality. It put him at the center of the Maya cosmos. He achieved his aim just like the builders of the great pyramids in Egypt. His greatness is acknowledged and admired, and the artworks depicting him are celebrated and debated by more people around the world than ever knew him in his long lifetime. Pakal wasn't the only Maya ruler whose reign produced great masterpieces. In fact, in the next lecture, we'll go just a day's travel away on the Usumacinta River, deep in the rainforest, to the site of Yaxchilan. The extraordinary stone carvings at Yaxchilan do something quite different from Pakal's sarcophagus. They will show us how the Maya elite performed blood sacrifice, how they hallucinated and took action on the sacred visions that they saw.